Hi everyone, so today I'm going to come to you with my December wrap-up. I think a lot of us I saw this sentiment along BookTube and I thought I would be the same, that we typically don't get a lot read in December. I know it hasn't always been my strongest reading month, but I surprised myself this year and I read 15 books. Ended up being a great reading month for me. What did I read? I read some that I would definitely consider new favorites and some I would definitely recommend to anyone, some with more specific tastes, and some that fell a little flat for me. But because I have so many books, I'm gonna get into this stack right here and show you. And I don't have them in a certain order, but I am gonna try to show them to you from least to most favorite that I read in December. Starting at the very bottom, this is without a doubt my least favorite. I was least interested in it, and that was Epileptic 1 by David B. And I read this for the Kaboomathon, which happened at the beginning of the month, which is like a graphic novel. I'm gonna pick at this sticker. It was like a graphic novel comic book type of readathon, which sounded really fun. But this was my least favorite book. I think I gave it maybe 2 stars, 2.5. It's not that it was bad, I just wasn't that interested, and I thought I would be, because it is about a guy growing up with his brother who has epilepsy and how that's affected his life. And I thought it'd be interesting for me, particularly because my husband has epilepsy, but I just didn't connect with it at all. Someone else might like it more than me. It just wasn't my style. Why do I always flip to the weirdest stuff too? Looks like this guy had like a surgery or something. See, I don't even remember that much about the story, but that one fell a little flat for me. The next one that wasn't a favorite, but I do remember more, so that says something about it, was Fun Home, a family tragicomic by Alison Bechtel or Bechtel, I'm not sure. This one was okay. I had mixed feelings about it, but mainly it didn't invoke a lot of feeling or emotion for me. It felt like the author was trying to keep me distant, or maybe not necessarily trying, but that's kind of what happened. And it was just sort of, it was weird, and I couldn't connect with it. Again, another one I couldn't connect with that well, I think because of all the literary references that I didn't understand, because she clearly has read and loved a lot of classic literature that I haven't read. So, you know, I just didn't understand all the references, or I just didn't care, you know, about all this talk about this classic literature. I just wanted to get to her personal story, which is part of her personal story. So that's more a me thing than like a criticism of the story at all. But this was a graphic memoir about growing up with a cold and distant father, basically cold and distant parents in general, and then her coming out as a lesbian in college, and then finding out that her dad's actually gay. So it has all the makings of a great story, and I know it's someone's memoir, so I don't want to like, this is her life. It isn't like something she came up with. So I don't want to criticize it too heavily, because, I mean, it is what it is, and I didn't hate it, but I also, like, couldn't connect with it, you know, like I wanted to. It was okay for me. I think this has a very specific audience that maybe would like it a whole lot more than me. You know, and I appreciate her sharing her story. I just, you know, it was okay. Now, this next one I'm going to tell you about is The Night Olivia Fell by Christina McDonald. And this was one that, while I was reading it, I was actually like pausing and setting it down and like having a conversation with you guys in my head while reading this book. It was one that I think probably would have been fun to vlog. The reason being, before I even give you a synopsis, the language in here, what is it? I tried to Google this and I couldn't really find it. I can't remember. There's a word for it, but whenever you're describing something and you say she was as angry as a bear, or the rain fell heavy as iron, like I'm really bad at that. But like this and like this and like that, this was constant throughout this whole book. Everything was like something over and over. I mean, we're talking sometimes up to 4 times or 5 times in a 2-page span, and I didn't really understand that. It was just too much. And let me give you an example of this before I give you the quick rundown of the synopsis. I think that I had made a mental note that page 18 was the place I needed to turn. Okay, so this one wasn't too bad. The questions were as rapid as a machine gun, asked in Sarah's most demanding mom voice. And then the next one, this was like one of the first ones that really caught my attention and made me think something was going on. But it says, the air was like molasses, weighted like water. What? I don't understand it. Grief hurtled toward me, crashing into me and beating inside my chest like a giant furious animal. So it was just, I don't know, a constant comparison to things that for my mind, it felt like way too much. Like it almost felt like I was reading a little bit of a soap opera where it was just really dramatic language constantly. Everything was like something really massive and or destructive or dramatic. Everything was just like something constantly. That said, though, I did not hate this book. It was just some of the writing like felt very, I rolled my eyes sometimes. But this story wasn't that bad. This was about a woman who gets a call one night and her daughter is actually in the hospital. And it turns out she's in a coma because she fell off a bridge, or she's brain dead, not necessarily in a coma. She's not going to wake up. And she fell off a bridge, or she was pushed because her mom notices she has these marks around her wrist, but they're just saying that she fell, and then the bomb drops. Her daughter is actually pregnant, and they decide, or did they decide, or I think it was actually against the law, they couldn't take her off of life support because she was pregnant, so they had to try to keep her alive, so in order to keep the baby alive. So there's a whole can of worms right there that, you know, is definitely open for discussion. Although it didn't really, the story didn't really cover that aspect of it, which I wish it had. But that was the basis of this story. And I will say it wasn't bad. I actually quite enjoyed it. And I read it pretty quickly. So basically, I enjoyed it for what it was. It wasn't that bad, but again, a little dramatic with the language. One of the other books that I read this month was My Side of the Mountain by Jean Craighead George, and this was one that I actually read aloud to my kids. So this was like a homeschool / bedtime read aloud that I read with them, and I quite enjoyed this. I like Jean Craighead George as an author. I just remember being a big fan of the Julia the Wolves books when I was younger. And some of her other ones, you know, didn't always appeal to me, but this one was pretty nice. This was about a boy who decides he's going to leave his home in the city and strike out on his own and go back to his ancestral family land, basically, or land that his ancestors had bought and farmed 100 years before or something. And he's going to strike out on his own and be a city boy that learns to live and provide for himself completely alone in the woods. And he ends up finding a baby hawk or falcon. Now I can't remember what she is. Is she a falcon? That feels important, but I don't remember. And raising her. Oh, I think it's a falcon. Yeah, because he's using her for hunting, like falconry, with his, like, you know, I keep holding my hand up because that's what falcons do. They sit on your hand and then they fly off and hunt rabbits and things. So he has that, and it's just basically about his adventures in learning to be self-sufficient and actually his reconnection with people, because he leaves and I think his intent is to sever himself off from society, but it ends up he ends up finding his way back into society and support in a way that, you know, he likes and can tolerate. That's what I got from this book, and I thought it was a sweet book. I enjoyed reading it aloud to them, and they really enjoyed it, so that gets high stars for me, just simply because it's not a book meant for me, but my kids really enjoyed it, so, which they are the audience, so therefore it gets high ratings, and I didn't hate reading it, so it was a win all around. The next book that I read this month, I actually finished it. I started reading it back in October, was Intercepts by T.J. Payne, and it's a pretty thick book. Let me see. Oh, well, it's like 300 something pages. It just feels really heavy. I don't know if they use heavier paper or what, But I bought this back in October as part of like a spooky reading month that I was curating for myself. And I actually set this aside in favor of other books and just sort of read it slowly, a little chapter at a time. But what this is about is a man who works in a secret government facility. And what they have in this facility that no one is allowed to know about, he isn't even allowed to tell his family, is they are working on human beings and making them into these intercepts, basically. They sort of, I don't understand the complete process even, but they drug them up in some way and have them like in these really sterile environments, and they aren't even really human anymore. They're shells, and they use their minds to intercept enemies and get intelligence on other countries and governments. And what are those people called that do crime? I wanted to say burglars. Yes, burglars do crime, but they weren't trying to intercept the minds of burglars. I can't even think of the word, and it's such a simple word. People that do crime, drug cartels, stuff like that, like big name crimes going on. They have these shells of people intercepting and getting intelligence by basically invading other people's minds. They aren't allowed to have access to their minds anymore. They're not even allowed to be human anymore. They're kept completely dependent on these people that work on this in this facility. And then what happens is the guy that's in charge, sort of like the manager or something of this facility of mindless drones and the doctors and people that are controlling them, his daughter actually gets intercepted and horror basically ensues. So it was a pretty unique story concept, or one that I haven't, you know, it's not a story that I've read before. And it sounds really interesting, but for some reason, this book for me, it wasn't bad. When I was reading it, I was in it. It was good. I wouldn't consider it particularly scary. It was pretty gory, but not, I didn't really find it that creepy. But when I was reading it, I was into it, but it was also a book that was really easy for me to set down, which is why it took me pretty much 2 months to finish it. So all in all, it was okay. Someone else might like it more than me. Again, not bad, just not riveting for my taste. Now this one I don't have a physical copy of, but that is Be the Pack Leader by Cesar Millan. And it says with Melissa Jo Pelter. And this was one I didn't actually physically read. I listened to it on audiobook when I would go to appointments and, you know, activities I was driving my kids to for several weeks. I think I listened to this, and this was really great. I think a lot of people, you know, will recognize at least Cesar Millan. A lot of people have heard of him because of his show, even if you haven't watched it. But he is the dog whisperer, and this is just a book of, a lot of it was just stories of clients he's worked with and helping them be the pack leader in their families with their dogs. And, you know, I really enjoyed this book, and it's not necessarily for the dog advice, although I think the advice on like raising your dog right and everything are spot on. But it wasn't necessarily for that. He also, I feel like, is really good at getting into the minds of people. I think it's one of his taglines is he has to train people more than he has to train dogs, because the dogs already know how to dog. They know how to be a dog. It's training people on how to live with them and bring out their best qualities. And it almost like, I listen to this quite often going to see my therapist, and it almost seemed like I was already gearing up with therapy through him, because I feel like he's really good. I think he's done his reading or his research on a lot on the human brain as well, like emotional intelligence and stuff like that. And I don't know, it just was very soothing for me to listen to him give like his theories on like people and their issues and the way they think. Like, I feel like he would make just as good a human therapist as a dog one, which I think is what he calls himself, a dog therapist, or at least a dog behaviorist. So I really enjoyed listening to this, and I would definitely listen to more books by Cesar Millan. Another book that I read this month that I actually got from the library and I don't have on me anymore is The Cabin at the End of the World by Paul Tremblay. And I didn't realize this, but a couple years ago, I read another book of his that was Head Full of Ghosts, which I thought was okay. I think I gave that one like 3 stars. It wasn't what I expected, and I wasn't really scared by it, which is why I rated it only 3 stars. But not relevant. I read this one, The Cabin at the End of the World, this month, or this past month. This is about a family who are on a trip, you know, they're on a vacation in the middle of the woods in a cabin, and their daughter's playing out front, and a guy shows up, a man, and he starts talking to her. And then as they're talking, he's actually playing with her, getting her comfortable, like just talking to her and interacting. And then some other people show up, and they're all carrying weapons. And he basically tells her, and I can't remember his exact words, but everything's going to be okay. And I don't want to give away too much, but I will just say that this book took a lot of turns I did not expect at all. So that I really appreciated. I like being surprised. This was one of those where I didn't quite know what was going to happen next at any given moment. Like, it could turn in 100 different directions. So I really liked that whole surprise element of it. It made me feel just very questioning, uneasy, confused, because I didn't know what the people in this book were up to. You know, you don't know the intentions of any of the people that are making you nervous. Like, I didn't know any of their intentions at any given moment. So I really enjoyed this. I could not have predicted when the people show up in the beginning with their weapons. I could not have predicted their reason for being there. I thought it was a whole new take on this whole cabin of the woods and creepy people show up storyline that I know has happened before, but this was pretty unique to me. Another book that I listened to an audiobook in December was I Have the Right To, a high school survivor story of sexual assault, justice, and hope by Chessie Prout and with Jen Abelson. So this was a memoir about a girl who actually got sexually assaulted in her boarding school. And it was narrated by her in the audiobook, which I really liked. I hate to say that I enjoyed this because, you know, someone got assaulted and that's why this book exists. But I really appreciated hearing about her perspective of this and the way she chose to fight it. I think a lot of times where, and that's not the fault of anyone, but we hear a lot of stories of people that really turn inward, you know, because they were traumatized and then stuff doesn't come out for years and years later. However, Chessie chose to say something almost immediately after things happened. And then her story just kind of plays out from there. And she also suffers a lot of repercussions from speaking out, even though she did it immediately. And we always, you know, we hear a lot of stories about people that were assaulted and they speak up weeks, months, years later, and they are always criticized for waiting. Someone always says, oh, you're just trying to attack this person. Maybe, how do we even know what happened? Whereas she spoke up immediately, and it was still like, she still got punished, like societally, you know, by her friends and peers and teachers, for speaking out. So it just went to show me, at least, that there's no right way to speak up about a sexual assault. No matter how you do it, there are going to be people that don't take you seriously and attack you, don't believe you. This was like, I don't know, it was a little hard to listen to, just especially since I've got kids, and you know, this is one of the things that you have to worry about, and it just goes to show you it can happen anywhere, anytime. I mean, she went to a private boarding school, which we know, you know, logically as people in general, especially adults, that bad things can happen anywhere, anytime, and money or fame or, you know, wealth, any of that privilege doesn't prevent bad things from happening, but we also tend to assume more so, like, get more comfortable, you know, when we think about boarding schools and, I don't know, places where people of money, you know, dwell and go to. It just feels more shocking for some reason. And I like that this brings to attention that anybody can be assaulted and anybody can assault. Don't be fooled by good family or fame or money or anything like that. So I really enjoyed reading her memoir. She just never really backed down. I don't like that. Another book I don't have physically on me again, and that is Savage Appetites by Rachel Monroe, and it's 4 true stories of women, crime, and obsession. And if you guys remember, I actually picked this to be a part of Nonfiction November. I didn't end up reading it in November, or I didn't finish it. I finished it last month in December, and this one surprised me because this isn't quite what I thought it was. This is about 4 stories of really different women in their role in crime, whether they're defending murderers. What was the other ones? Victims, defender, victim, detective, where like the women in one story were obsessed with getting to the root of crimes and things like that. I don't really know how to describe this because it had several different stories in it, like more than just 4. And also you hear from the author and her take on what's going on as well throughout the stories. I'm butchering the synopsis of this, but basically it was good. I liked it as a person who likes hearing true crime podcasts and occasionally reading true crime books and documentaries, of course. This was a good complement to that type of interest, and I would definitely recommend this to other people who have interest in true crime documentaries and stories and things like this. I really liked it, basically. I'm losing my light rapidly. Oh, there we go. Oh, I found some more light. Now, another one that I was supposed to read for Nonfiction November and ended up reading last month was Mindhunter by John Douglas and Mark Olshaker, and it's inside the FBI's elite serial crime unit. And this one was great. I found this so informative. This is a former FBI guy, investigator, and it follows his story more than I thought it would, I will say. It kind of like is almost his biography, his job biography, and you hear from his personal life as well, kind of like how he began, how his childhood went and his formative years and what sort of led him to become like this leading FBI serial killer hunter, basically, or profiler. And I think that's my most favorite part of this book, was hearing how they profile serial killers. It's almost like he kept saying that people thought of it as like magic because he was there in the very beginning of it. Before there was ever even a profiling unit, because it was like a new science to profile killers. Before, it was very much like shots in the dark. But he and others helped kind of make up this formula, which worked, of what certain killers are like, what makes them tick, and how to even predict where and when they'll kill again so that they'll be easier to catch in the long run. So I found all that seriously fascinating. It almost like some of this stuff that I was reading here, I was like, am I supposed to know this? Like, because serial killers could read this and then like get your secrets. There was one part that I remembered here that I wanted to mention, where in order to get this guy to confess, again, it's all knowing like how the mind works and what's going to make a particular person tick. And there are kind of formulas for each different type of killer. But this one, he said, here's one thing you need to do. Get a bunch of manila file folders, put his name on all the tabs or whatever, wherever you normally see a name, and fill them with junk paper, and just have like a stack on the desk so that when you come in and question him, one of the first thing he sees is that stack. And that'll really help shake him to his core. And they did end up getting a confession from this guy. And that was one of the elements they used to get that confession. And they also like set up the room a certain way, like everything. Guys, this makes it sound like when you go get interviewed, like if, you know, they think you might be a killer, they have everything set up in a room to make you tick based off what they think, you know, how your particular killing style and the way your mind works. I mean, down to clock placement. It was just crazy. And I really enjoyed this book, obviously. Another book that I read in December was Speak by Lori Halse Anderson. And wait, what other book did I read by her? Oh, I read Fever 1791 or something like that, and I actually didn't like that one. This one, though, I wanted to try this one because I know this is a pretty well-known and popular book, and my librarian said that it was good but hard to read, and I get why she said that. But this is about a teenager who was sexually assaulted, and kind of like the year following that sexual assault in her school, and just being ostracized and bullied and having no friends and being deeply lonely, and just everything, all the ways that she acted out that spoke to there being a problem, but that nobody was picking up on, and just thinking she was being difficult or weird, participating in weird like actions and rituals and behaviors that you wouldn't necessarily like. I guess if you didn't have a trained eye to look for that stuff, it'd just be like, wow, this kid's being defiant and weird and just needs to get together and cut it out. This one was a pretty hard book, just because it reminded me so much of just how hard it is to be a teenager. Teenagers go through a lot, and especially in their own little society of teens, like things can get pretty harsh. It's like, what do I want to call it? It's like National Geographic or something with how brutal it can be sometimes, because teenagers are probably even more in touch, I think, with their animalistic nature than we are as adults. And that's, I don't know, that's my thoughts and take on being a teenager in high school. This just brought back a lot of memories of how hard that could be. That said, I did enjoy this book. I think it would be eye-opening for people in general, like about how invisible you can feel as a teenager, especially if you're having a problem. And teenagers aren't small adults, and that's one thing I think that our society forgets a lot, is they are still children. Their minds aren't completely mature yet, and so you think, you know, you can rely on a teenager to express themselves if there's a problem, but I mean, they can't. They can more than an 8-year-old or a 12-year-old, but still not as well as an adult. So they're still going to act out in ways that are going to be confusing and not seemingly related to a trauma that they've been through. So that's my important takeaway from that book. And I would recommend, this is one I think I would recommend to anyone should read it and see what you think about it. The next one I read was Before and After by Judy Christie and Lisa Wingate. And this is the incredible real-life stories of orphans who survived the Tennessee Children's Home Society. And I was pretty excited to see my library had this. This was a new buy for them, and it's a book that I had been intending to buy for several months, but just kept putting it off because I have so many that I've bought and need to read. One of the authors is Lisa Wingate, and she wrote Before We Were Yours, which I mistakenly thought was a true memoir, but it wasn't. It was a fictional kind of like family memoir story based on real events and stories that she's researched from survivors of the Tennessee Children's Home Society. This is a nonfiction book about them getting together at like a massive meeting or convention for families of survivors and survivors themselves, and you're just reading their different stories and how they came to be adopted or stolen, and how the Tennessee Children's Home literally affected thousands upon thousands of people in the United States that got adopted during that time period, which was, I think it was the 30s through the 50s, possibly the 60s, or is it the 40s through the 60s, the 30s through the 50s? I don't know. Somewhere in that time period, lots and lots of babies got adopted, and children. Lots of children died as well. So pretty hard stories to read about, and I think that I did tear up once or twice reading that, because I mean, these are real people that have suffered because of people's greed and corruption in local government even. It's just crazy. Another book that I read was this huge graphic novel, Blankets by Craig Thompson, and I read this one for Kaboomathon as well. Oh, have a couple more I forgot about. This one was huge, but I also, you know, read it in like a day. Like, it read really quickly and it was interesting. But this is another memoir about a guy who is religious. He's like part of the Christian religion, and he is struggling with his religion because he wants, I get that sense that he wants to do it right. If he's going to be religious, he's going to do it right. He's like all into it, trying to be a good Christian. And then he meets this girl who kind of throws a wrench into things. Not that she's trying to get him to move away from Christianity, but it confuses things, basically, for the direction he thought his life was going and the things that he believed, or ethical things that he wanted to do. It's hard to describe this without giving like a ton of stuff away, because I don't know, it's just a memoir about how this girl affected his life and the direction his life was going, and then the direction it took after he met her. That said, I did really like this quite a lot. I think it was one of my favorite graphic novels that I read for Kaboomathon. But my favorite one that I read for Kaboomathon was Kid Gloves, 9 Months of Careful Chaos by Lucy Nicely. And this is another memoir. I think I like this seems to be a theme. I think I like reading memoirs. Fascinating. This one of my favorite things about this one is just I mentioned this in several videos. The artwork in this is just gorgeous. This is about a woman who decides to get pregnant, or her journey to pregnancy, and the trials and struggles and tribulations that come with that journey sometimes, and also while you're pregnant, and the different health issues that could arise. And it's very informational too. Like, it always starts off a chapter with basically how your body works if you're someone that's trying to get pregnant, methods of getting pregnant, labor stuff, like just lots of facts and history in here, which really added to the story. Like, it made it better than just being a memoir of her life, just that she added in these historical and scientific aspects to it. Like this one, this woman's juggling perfect health, no booze, life change, social expectations, physical discomfort, and superstition. Really covers a lot of stuff, like historically and culturally and socially, that's expected of people that are getting pregnant and all that good stuff, and ends with the birth. And I think she's going to come out, I think she mentioned coming out with another novel, hopefully, that covers motherhood, which I am super excited about. I hope that happens. The last book that I read, I don't know if it was the last one I finished. Yeah, the last book that I read and finished for the month of December was The Handmaid's Tale, the graphic novel by Margaret Atwood. And then the art was in here was done by Renee Nault. And let me see. Oh, I wanted to make sure and mention that Lucy Nicely also did the artwork in this. Like, she illustrated it and wrote it, which is just amazing. Anyways, so I read this just the last couple days of December. I read The Handmaid's Tale several years ago and I really liked it. Now I'm watching the TV show. Finally, you guys, I'm watching it on Hulu. It is amazing. I love it. My husband is enjoying it, and he hasn't read any of The Handmaid's Tale. So you don't have to read it if you just want to watch it. Although I'd recommend you do read it. But this was just a graphic novel adaptation of The Handmaid's Tale, which is basically a dystopian that takes place in the United States, where the government is taken over by religious nuts, basically, who want to use women as broodmares and breed them to make more babies, because the fertility rate has gotten really low. And there's also a place for women that can't breed, and basically all women are subservient in future America, which is now called Gilead. And it's just a crazy ride of a story, and in graphic novel form, it's no less impactful, in my opinion. What is going on here? Goodness, I always flip to the craziest stuff. Sorry, guys, if that disturbs you. But anyways, those are all the books I read in December. Again, I had a great reading month. What did you guys read in December? Let me know in the comments below. I hope you guys enjoyed watching, and I'll see you all again really soon.